Nous allons reprendre les travaux. Veuillez prendre vos places. Nous allons reprendre les travaux de l'après-midi.
Good afternoon, everyone. I do see some distinguished delegates at the back of the room who have not yet taken their seats. Please, would you take your seats so we may begin the afternoon's work?
Nous avons pris
We have taken a break, and that has allowed us to relax a little. And it's also given us the opportunity to meet in our contact groups, to have exchanges about the issues that are of concern to us, and also have our lunch. Now we will continue our work. And we have moved on to item 8C on the agenda, which is with regard to quarantine and pre-shipment uses of methyl bromide. Alternatives are available for methyl bromide. It is appropriate for me to recall that the 34th meeting of the parties adopted decision 34/10 on stocks and QPS uses of methyl bromide. Under paragraph 1 of decision 3410, parties were invited to submit to the Ozone Secretariat on a voluntary basis by 1st of June 2023 a list of the pest and commodity combinations in which methyl bromide is needed or used in their countries. In the same decision, under paragraph 4, parties requested the TEEP and its methyl bromide technical options committee, in consultation with the Secretariat of the International Plant Protection Convention, to provide updated information on QPS uses for which alternatives are available. The response of the MBTOC is included in section 4.2 of the panel's progress report. Allow me to start again. The response of the MBTOC is included in section 4.2 of the panel's progress report. At the time of the finalization of its report, 2 parties, Australia and Canada, had submitted information in response to paragraph 4 of Decision 3410. Since the date of 1st June 2023 was set, it was noted that it was not possible to give an analysis of the information, but that it has used the principal categories and covered in the report to discuss an updating of the alternatives. This update having been done, the floor is now open for parties to provide us with further information and have a discussion about the use of methyl bromide in terms of quarantine and pre-shipment. The floor is therefore now open.
Parti souhaite
Would any party like to take the floor? I see Brazil. Brazil, you have the floor.
We would like to address specifically the policy consideration that suggests the elimination of future emissions of methyl bromide from pre-shipment applications. It is always time to recall the main reason why we're here, which is to think of ways to better implement the Montreal Protocol. And this is not only a technical discussion, even though a solid scientific knowledge leads to better decision making, as I have already mentioned on the Q&A. But this is also a policy-making environment. Looking at methyl bromide, Brazil is convinced that both science and policy-making do not point towards new obligations and restrictions at this point of time. Methyl bromide emissions have remained relatively stable for the last 6 years. Parties have successfully adhered to the obligations related to controlled uses of the substance, leading to a significant decline in atmospheric emissions of the substance. Since 2006, Brazil has eliminated the agricultural use of methyl bromide, anticipating the phase-out schedule provided by the Montreal Protocol. And until this day, we have not demanded critical use of the substance, which shows our willingness to comply with obligations that bring us closer to the goal of protecting and contributing to the restoration of the ozone layer. As a consequence of our joint efforts, scientific analysis shows us that most anthropogenic production has been phased out, leaving natural emissions as the dominant sources. In this regard, we note that there are still some concerns related to key alternatives to methyl bromide due to their high GWP and also regarding their costs, meaning that the replacement of the substance would not guarantee that we would actually address what we are here to discuss and would impose many burdens to the countries. There are also concerns about the effectiveness of existing alternatives, many of which do not meet phytosanitary requirements for allowing international trade. As we lack suitable alternatives to the substance in many cases, we are comfortable with voluntary submissions to the Secretariat about the uses of methyl bromide. However, we would not support at this point additional restrictions or obligations for the reasons we've already mentioned. Thank you.
Nous remercions l'honorable
Thank you, distinguished delegate from Brazil, for that information. In her statement, I don't see any further. The European Union, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. From the EU and its member state side, we would like to thank again the panel for the comprehensive information on methyl bromide, which includes the outcome of last year's decision, 3410. Perhaps to have a look back, when methyl bromide became a controlled ozone-depleting substance in 1992, there was a general exemption created for quarantine and pre-shipment uses because countries believed that there were no alternatives at that time. Today we know that the atmospheric concentrations of methyl bromide are no longer falling and that they have stabilized in the atmosphere above the natural baseline due to the ongoing anthropogenic use, predominantly from the quarantine and pre-shipment purposes. Now, and since a while back, CHIP has also been underlining several times that alternatives are available for pre-shipment uses. It seems that the message to us as parties is clear: reducing the emissions from methyl bromide QPS uses, and notably from the pre-shipment uses, is yet another significant option for us as parties to protect the ozone layer. And quick action here to control the emissions or adopting alternatives would result in an immediate benefit to the ozone layer recovery. And when looking at the information in the report, we can see that past responses to the various policy decisions that have been taken by the parties are very well visible in the reduction of emissions. There is a good table 4.1 in the progress report, which is actually a very good presentation of such rapid benefits. Among other messages from the panel to us as parties, the definitions of the protocol of quarantine and pre-shipment uses may still pose some challenges to the parties or for parties to apply. And we were given examples of uses which are often wrongly classified as quarantine or PS, and where alternatives should thus be used instead. And we were also given some tools and examples which were developed in the past to assist us as parties in determining what constitutes quarantine and pre-shipment. So having said that, we would like to say that we would like to continue working towards the reduction of the emissions from this methyl bromide uses for quarantine and pre-shipment, and to follow up on the findings in the TEEP progress report and also last year's decision on QPS uses. Our suggestion would be to go along a few kind of main work streams or points or lines. The first one being to improve the reporting and the correct categorization into quarantine and pre-shipment uses according to the agreed definitions of the Montreal Protocol. We think that this could be done by continuing to gather the lists of pest and commodity combinations in which methyl bromide is needed or used, but also by enhancing that information to cover the quantities of methyl bromide involved. And we believe this would give a better overview for parties to understand where alternatives can be used. We would also like to thank parties who submitted the information as a response to last year's decision, and it is already some basis which can already help to improve the reporting and quantification, but more information would be welcomed from other parties as well. Another stream of work could be to take stock of a previous decision that was adopted in 2009, decision 26, in which parties were encouraged to submit to the Ozone Secretariat national strategies to reduce methyl bromide use and or emissions in the QPS sector. And the final stream to accelerate the adoption of alternatives but also the use of recapture of technologies and other emission prevention strategies. And we could perhaps suggest that T prepares a report for us as parties to the next open-ended working group summarizing this kind of information. It's a busy agenda this week. We have engaged in some talks at the margins of this meeting already to try to understand a little bit what the lines of us going forward on this topic could be. And we would like to continue discussing this, and in view of proposing a CRP at the MOP in Nairobi. So to continue to discuss this at the margins of this meeting. And with this, I thank you for the word, Mr. Co-Chair.
Merci.
Thank you very much to the distinguished representative of the European Union. I will now give the floor to Norway. And we have on the list Norway, Senegal, and Kenya, as well as Australia. After Australia, we will close the list of speakers. Norway, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. We would also like to thank the TIEP for their report and thank the parties that have submitted information. MBTOC states that the elimination of the emissions from quarantine and pre-shipment use is the single largest short-term gain that could be made to gain further reduction of effective equivalent stratospheric chlorine concentrations and improvement of the ozone layer. In addition, we note that the MBTOC suggests that there are available alternatives for most of the pre-shipment uses, and if these alternatives were used, could eliminate 30 to 40% of the methyl bromide currently used for QPS purposes. We have concerns about the substantial volumes of methyl bromide still in use for quarantine and pre-shipment applications, and we consider this could be low-hanging fruits considering the wide availability of alternatives for some of the uses. We encouraged the countries that still use methyl bromide for quarantine and pre-shipment applications to strongly consider transitioning to other alternatives, recalling also that the meeting of the parties in Decision 7.5 urged the parties to minimize the emissions and use of methyl bromide. We think that the distinguished delegate from the European Union has proposed several constructive ways that we could move forward on this issue, and we are prepared to participate in further discussions. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Merci.
Thank you so much to the distinguished delegate from Norway. Senegal, you have the floor.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair. And good afternoon to all of the delegates in the room. We'd like to thank the Ozone Secretariat for having given us the eminent experts to speak to us to clarify situations. I'd like to thank TEEP once again for that. I'd like to ask this particular question. I did not hear the biological alternatives that are available, and also I'd like to ask whether these alternatives to methyl bromide are as efficacious as methyl bromide itself. And my last question is, one part being biological and one part being chemical. Could I have some more information on that, please? Thank you. Thank you so much to the distinguished delegate of Senegal.
Kenya, vous avez la...
Kenya, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. This delegation also wish to thank TIEP for the information presented on methyl bromide alternatives for QPS use. Yesterday, Kenya actually asked about these alternatives, whether they are available, and the delegation wanted to know about the cost and also accessibility. Now that today it has been presented that those alternatives are there, we have seen another challenge, because when you are dealing with importer and exporter, the importer of the methyl bromide, the alternatives that for QPS, it will be that country that is importing that will deal with it. But now you have the importer of the products treated by these alternatives. So as a delegation, we are wondering that we need actually that cooperation between that importer of the products that are treated with alternatives or alternative to MP for QPS, and also the exporter of those products. So in this case, it is actually important that this meeting ensures that that cooperation exists, so that we will not have a challenge or those countries that are exporting the products treated with these alternatives. The importing also countries should be aware of that, so that they will not have any issue of those alternatives. So we really thank TIAP if these alternatives are availed, so that we know where to get them. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you to the distinguished delegate of Kenya. Australia, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. And first of all, this delegation would like to thank the TIP for its report. Quite useful information presented when also looked at in parallel with the information in the quadrennial report. So where to start on this one? I think I'd like to thank my colleague from Brazil, who I think gave an excellent summary and covered off many of the points that Australia would want to make. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to repeat those points, but it would certainly align Australia with the invention made by Brazil. I guess first of all, looking at the issue that's come up about the definition of QPS, and that potentially some parties are unsure about the definition. This party is quite confident with the definition and doesn't believe that further assistance is needed, but there may be parties, and certainly we'll accept that there could be parties that do need further advice on the definition of QPS, and we would urge those parties to talk with the MEBTOC if they have any uncertainty, or in fact use the opportunity to talk with other parties at this meeting or at the regional ozone officers meeting. There are lots of opportunities to get advice on this without having to revisit definitions. From the point of view of asking the TIP to undertake a further report, I would note that we've just had this report, and we've also had the TIP present us with its quadrennial report, and both of those are big undertakings, and we're just a little bit I guess concerned about the crowded schedule we already have, as well as overloading not only the TIP with requests for additional work, but as well as the parties. I look at the information that Australia provided for this report. We undertake quite a detailed assessment of the state of play as far as QPS goes in Australia. We do that sort of about every 5 years. It's a very detailed and rigorous undertaking. It takes quite a lot of time to do, and it's quite an expensive exercise, but it's an exercise that we think is valuable, but it's not something that we want to do every year. But also, look, we do take note of the comments from the European Union and from Norway about reducing QPS emissions, and yep, that's something that is worthwhile looking at to an extent. And I note that on a voluntary basis, many countries are already doing that. Australia's established an offshore fumigation accreditation scheme quite some years ago, which has proved to be very successful, and that scheme ensures fumigators are properly trained. It's been highly successful and has greatly reduced the needs for goods to be refumigated once they arrive in Australia, and reduce the overall use of methyl bromide. Australia and its US, New Zealand and Japan Quad partners are also making significant investments in developing alternatives, the results of which have already seen transition to alternatives in many areas. New Zealand is in the process of making recapture mandatory, and of course the EU has its outright ban on the use of methyl bromide. So there's already quite a lot of voluntary activities that are going to reduce emissions of methyl bromide. So we're happy to engage with the EU on this, but we do have concerns as outlined. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Thank you so much to the distinguished delegate for Australia. Thank you for the information which you have shared with us. Now, there's a party which had submitted information in response to paragraph 1. I believe that that party could perhaps take the floor now and say something more about this. In fact, I had attempted to give the floor, and then at the last minute the party seems to have said that they no longer want to speak. Did I understand this correctly? United States, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. And yes, we do want to clarify that the United States did submit the information requested in decision 3410 before the deadline that was in that decision. So we are a little surprised to see that it only lists 2 parties have submitted data. We support there being some additional analysis of these data by the TEEP, given that it appears there has not yet been sufficient time to review what has been submitted. And at this point, until we get additional analysis, we believe that a decision would not be necessary, especially given the crowded agenda associated with this meeting. We would support those statements that have been made by Australia and Brazil prior to this intervention. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup à l'honorable.
Thank you so much to the distinguished delegate of the United States. Now, before I summarize and before I conclude, I'm going to give the floor to the Secretariat.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Just to apologize that on the slide it says 2 parties submitted. That was a mistake. We should have said 3 parties, so we apologize for that mistake. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Nous allons
Well, in that case, we're going to summarize. So, all the parties who took the floor stated that efforts remain to be done, aimed at improving the situation. And what we can say at this point is that this discussion will be included into the report of the meeting. And we're now going to move on to the next agenda item. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Fidemer. Then we move to agenda item 8D, the challenges and options for future configuration and functioning of the panel technical options committees. There was a decision at the 34th MOP in which the parties requested TEEP to provide more information on options for future configuration and functioning of the TOCs. TEEP took up that task and set up a working group. The recommendations of the working group are set out in Chapter 8 of the TEEP 23 Progress Report, and a summary of TEEP new recommendation is included in Addendum 2 to the note of the Secretariat, 45/2 Addendum 2. As presented by TEEP a couple of hours ago, the panel proposes to keep its current structure with existing 5 TOCs. In case of the RTOC, however, they propose they have 2 subgroups, one on the cold chain and the other one on space heating and cooling. For cross-cutting issues such as refrigerants and energy efficiency, the co-chairs will manage them across the 2 subgroups. And they also propose to have 4 co-chairs for the RTOC. This is in short the summary and also how TEEP presented that. And now I would like to open the floor for interventions. And I see the European Union is on my list.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Co-Chair. I apologize, but I'm actually coming back to the previous agenda point. The other co-chair summarized the conclusion by saying that it would be, the report would be integrated in the final report, which we find perfect. It was a good discussion. But from the side of the European Union, we wanted to continue to engage on this topic in the margins, and we are reflecting about a conference room paper. I think we've been indicating what the elements were. We also heard other parties indicate that it would be good that TEAP continues to look at the data. There was quite little time, so I assume integrating in the report doesn't mean that the agenda item was closed. So just to be clear where we are in the process. I'm also happy to react on TEAP, but I would prefer first to have your reaction. Thank you very much.
Merci à l'honorable délégué.
Thank you so much to the distinguished delegate of the European Union. The agenda has not been completely set in stone. Discussions can be continued, and they can be continued to ensure that at the next MOP we are in a position to address the topic in a more in-depth, more substantive way. The item in question is not closed. The parties can, should they choose, to continue their discussions on this topic. And let us also add the proposal which was just made. I think we're going to consider all of these proposals. They will all be incorporated into the report of the meeting. And this will serve to bolster the report of this meeting.
Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres préoccupations à ce sujet?
Are there any further concerns on this agenda item? Can we continue? We don't see any requests for the floor by the parties.
Further on agenda item 8D, and after the introduction I would like to ask parties to intervene on this item 8D on the future configuration and functioning of the technical options committees of TEEP. Please, the floor is yours. So now I see the European Union, I think, on this item. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. I welcome the report by TIAP. I find it very clear. We would like to focus on the elements related to RTOC, because that was certainly something we had discussions among parties last year on this topic. We find that the note gives really a good structured discussion on what are the kind of work and topics that RTOC needs to consider. And it has a clear discussion on what the methodology or the practice of work could be in the TOC. It discusses clearly what the applications have in common and also what the differences are. And we note indeed that to some extent these differences are often focused around the fact that companies tend to specialize in one or the other product category. We welcome that the suggested approach forward is to continue to maintain a single RTOC. We note that the working arrangements are proposed to be to work with subgroups or working groups, one focused on cold chain and one on air conditioning. But also, and I think that is very important for the EU, it talks about cross-cutting issues. And it's quite interesting to see the listing of the cross-cutting issues. It refers to refrigerants, energy efficiency, servicing, industrial refrigeration, heat engines, and modeling. And to some extent, certainly, let's say the first elements of what I listed, I mean, they are kind of crucial if you look at the conversions we need to achieve in the sectors. It confirms to us that there is logic to continue to work in a setting that allows to address these cross-cutting issues in one group, in one setting. If we would split the talks, it's not clear to us why the conclusions of the two talks would ensure a better harmonized outcome. It's, to us, the opposite. We still need a place where this harmonization, this cross-fertilization across working groups happens, because clearly a very large or important part of the technologies supporting these product categories is connected, is similar across product groups. As such, we find at first sight the proposed way forward balanced. We do want to note that regarding the working group on air conditioning, we understand it as the working group on air conditioning and heat pumps, knowing that heat pump technology for our region is of key importance to decarbonize the heating systems of our building sector. We note in the beginning on the Q&A of agenda item A that Norway asked how the RTOC would function and if the experts would work in both parts of, let's say, the working groups, or if they would be mainly functioning in one of the two working groups. And we noted also the reply by the TIAP co-chair that the idea is that they would work in one specific group. I have to say that could be a bit worrying if that would also mean that only a limited amount of these experts are involved in the cross-cutting issues. I think it would be logic, of course, that when cross-cutting issues are discussed, the whole group can have input and can cross-fertilize the debate. But I assume in a way that that is the logic of the proposal. But in that way, I think it would certainly be, well, helpful to know if that's the idea on how the restructuring is being planned. Given that this is a new approach, we look certainly forward to hear in the future and get feedback from RTOC how the new working arrangements impact and hopefully improve the work. If indeed it has ensured that there is reduced work, with that I mean less duplication of work, because I think that was one of the concerns, and if the interaction between the two subgroups works well. Finally, it's a bit listed to the next agenda point, but I'm going to quickly make the remark anyway. We note that RTOC has been reinvigorated with a significant amount of new experts, and that for the moment no additional expertise is sought for. We underline the key importance to have a balanced set of expertise in RTOC to be able to address the challenges, but also the opportunities ahead for this sector. Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you. I would like to give the floor to Norway and then the USA, and I also would like to request if parties would like to take the floor, please push the button and indicate that you would like to say something. So first, Norway.
Thank you, Co-Chair. We would like to thank the TIP and express our appreciation for the work done to consider alternative options based on the discussion at our meetings last year. It is our understanding from the description in the progress report that the work in the AirTalk will be separated into quite clearly separated subgroups, cold chains and air conditioning space cooling. However, we are still struggling understanding the rationale for such a separation. For us, this is not really aligning with the system approach that, for example, the task force on energy efficiency just presented to us yesterday. Indeed, if you take supermarkets as an example, integrating both aspects of cold chains, but as well for space cooling, and considering those aspects in an integrated way would allow greater energy efficiency gains. We also have concerns whether the proposed organization of work within the AirTalk would create an unnecessarily high number of cross-cutting issues to deal with. We are supporting the idea of continuing with one single AirTalk, and we also recognize that the workload of the AirTalk has increased tremendously during the past years. And we think that it is reasonable for the AirTalk to have an additional number of members, particularly considering the broad range of expertise needed. But also, in order to limit the increase of members needed to cover the matrix of expertise needed, we believe that it is also important to consider carefully how the AirTalk can make the most efficient use of the expertise on board. Indeed, we believe that several experts may contribute substantially in both areas of cold chains and air conditioning space cooling, as well as in cross-cutting issues. We are open to continue discussing how we can enable the work of the AirTalk better. Thank you, Co-Chair.
Thank you, Norway. And let's say I would like to close the list now. I have the USA and Australia on the list and Kuwait. So if there are any parties who would like to speak, please indicate. Otherwise, I will close the list. So now USA, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair, and we are very appreciative of the work that the TEEP did in coming up with a proposal. We engaged last year in this discussion, and we looked at the TEEP's proposal last year, and we were actually quite supportive of the way that they were thinking, what we thought was a holistic approach of looking at the work of the FTAC and the RTAC and where they overlap and what the cross-cutting issues were, and coming up with a new configuration that kind of took those two different talks and divided them in a different way. That said, there wasn't consensus on moving forward with that approach last year, and we asked the TEEP to go back and look again. We want to highlight a couple points about what the TEEP has presented, and we did look back at the TOR, the terms of reference for the TEEP, and it seems to us like there are some places where this may not be consistent with the terms of reference, so that is something we would like to further discuss and think through and understand. These two subcommittees, and I think my colleague from the European Union noted that you would be a member of one or the other. It seems to us another approach would be to divide the work of the RTAC into two different talks. Those talks could choose to meet at the same time and in the same location. The structure that's being proposed with the additional co-chair and membership at a level that in the terms of reference would constitute two different talks. So it seems to us like there are other possible ways to address that. From our perspective, no matter how you divide the work, there's always going to be cross-cutting issues, not just between parts of the RTAC or two different talks if it were divided, but similarly to the FTAC. And we saw that in the discussion we had, I want to say yesterday, but it's all one long day to me, but on energy efficiency where we talked about the role of foams. So there'll always be this overlap. We also want to note that I don't remember the exact percentage, but I want to say it was certainly more than 80% of HFCs are used in the sectors that are covered currently by the RTAC. If you look at the body of this work and the requests, we fully agree that the requests are disproportional to the RTAC, or you could say they are proportional because they are based on where HFCs are being used. So from that perspective, dividing that work would make sense to us. Earlier today, we commented and asked questions of the TEEP. Our reasoning was to note, and we heard our colleague from the European Union reiterate, companies specialize. They're specialized normally in cold food chain type applications or in air conditioning type applications. So it does seem to us that there could be that perspective as well for why it might be two different committees. And also many of the standards are written for air conditioning or written for refrigeration. We do understand there'll be cross-cutting issues. These same substitutes used in these sectors are often the same substitutes used in other sectors covered by other TACs, including whether or not it's an aerosol application, which would be covered by the MC TAC, a foam application that would be covered by the RTAC. It could still be the same substance, by the FTAC. So I think from our perspective, we would say there are many different possible ways to look at this. We appreciate the TEEP brought this one forward, and we would like to discuss it. Our first thoughts, though, of it, just to again reiterate those, is that to us, we think that this is better as two separate talks. But we're certainly open to have that discussion and work with parties to find a solution, particularly this year as we're dealing with the terms of reference for the next quadrennial report. It's a good time for us to look at how we're setting up the TEEP and its various talks for success. Thank you.
Thank you, USA. I now give the floor to Australia.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair, and thank you very much to the TEEP for putting forward its view on the future consideration of the TEEP. We welcome, in the first instance, the focus on seeking out new expertise to assist it with new areas of research and to maintain or enhance existing areas of interest. We generally support the idea of looking at two different areas in the RTOC for its work, one being on refrigeration and the other one being on air conditioning and heat pump activities. We think this split seems to be a reasonable split, and we did understand from the TEEP this morning, this afternoon, sometime in the past, that expertise was generally separate. I think there seems to be a little bit of discussion still needed on whether that should be in one TOC with two working groups or in two TOCs, and I think, you know, this delegation is open to considering both options on the way forward. We're happy to have further discussions in the margins of this meeting in terms of whether we need to keep this agenda item open at this meeting or not. I'm not sure that we need to, but of course we'll need to come back to it at the meeting of parties to try and come to a conclusion on this. Thank you, Co-Chair.
Thank you. I have Kuwait on my list.
Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair, and I will extend my appreciation to the TEEP for their excellent job in that one. And I also will echo what the previous distinguished delegates was mentioning, that the need of RTOC to be very effective. I think seeking rich expertise in different fields now and subsectors is the major issue for the TEEP to emphasize on the issues is being raised by parties. I think there is a lot of areas that need to be covered, but I also share the same thoughts of the distinguished delegate from Australia was mentioning. Should we have one RTOC and different working group, or should we start having a number of RTOC? Because I think that it's maybe in the future it will extend it and we'll have more and more and more RTOC. So I'm flexible for the both options, but I think that the refrigeration and the air conditioning, it can be one RTOC and several working group under it. But I'm also flexible to have two RTOC, one for the refrigeration sector and one for the air conditioning, but in a condition that these two cannot be divided anymore for subsectors under these RTOCs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kuwait. And although I already closed the list, but I think there's one party requesting for the floor, so that's Senegal. And then I really would like to move on and propose a way forward. Senegal.
Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair. We thank the fact that there is a table over refrigeration. That's very important. And it's the notion of sustainability and viability. The refrigeration section, RAC, it's MAC, it's also commercial, marketing, and it's health, it's vaccines, it's agriculture, it's livestock, it's tourism, it's fisheries, it's transport. In all of those sectors, if we have good cold chains which have been developed by the human resources, trained by the human resources, then this will be a viable way for our countries to move towards. Thanks.
Thank you, Senegal. What I would like to propose to keep this agenda item open, but that parties have the options to talk in the margins, in the corridors on, let's say, the proposals put forward by TEEP, and we come back to it tomorrow. But there's the possibility to consult in the margins and also maybe talk with TEEP about that. So that's what my proposal. Is that agreeable? If yes, then we go to item 8E, panel membership changes. As usual, the TEEP provided in its 2023 progress report updated information on the status of the membership of the panels and its stocks. That information is included in Annex 4 of the progress report. Table 3 of the addendum to the note by the Secretariat lists TEEP members whose terms expire at the end of this year. The procedures relevant to nomination and appointment of TEEP members can be found in the terms of reference of the panel. The TEEP progress report and addendum 2 to the Secretariat's note also contain the matrix of needed expertise and the standardized nomination form. Both the matrix and the nomination form should be used when parties make nominations, and they have been posted in the meeting portal. The procedures for nominating and appointing members and co-chairs are contained in the TEEP's terms of reference. Appointments of co-chairs of the TEEP and the TOC and senior expert members of TEEP are made in a decision by the parties at the MOP. At this meeting, one nomination has been received so far for the position of RTOC co-chair, and the relevant nomination has been posted on the meeting portal. Normally, it's not a time during the OEWG that all the nominations are already known, and if parties would like to nominate, it's still time. So in the coming months, that's definitely possible, and then the Secretariat will post it on the meeting portal. I would like to suggest that parties consult informally in the margins of this meeting with a view on deciding the nominations at the MOP later this year. And I also would like to encourage parties to consult with TEEP. I do hope this is a way forward, and are there any comments or suggestions? If yes, then it's now time to push the button. I don't see any requests, so I would like to close this agenda item and continue with 8F. Any other issues? When we looked at the agenda and concluded the agenda, we clearly asked if there would be any parties which would have an item for 8F, any other issues. There was none put forward by a party, so my proposal is to close this agenda item as well. I see one request, so is it still a request? Okay, I see it's European Union.
Yes, Mr. Co-Chair, it's certainly not something where we want to prolong the agenda, but it's just, in a way, a point of information and a reaction on the TIAP report, where we just wanted to indicate that we appreciated the discussion in the TIAP report on the issue of MDIs. The TIAP report updated us on what are the new low global warming potential propellants that are available. We would like to stress again that in the EU, companies have been starting to make announcements about the introduction of new global warming potential propellants towards 2025 and a switch of the complete portfolio by 2030. We also think that our update of our F-gas regulation will provide a serious incentive for making this switch. Guidelines for manufacturers of MDIs to apply for authorizations for MDI projects with new propellants have been issued by the European Medical Agency, and this was also noted in the reports by TIAP. Furthermore, the European Medical Agency has also had some initial contacts with partner agencies in other regions of the world. Given that TIAP itself raised concerns about this transition and stressed the necessity for careful management of the transition, being relevant, of course, for patients' health, we would be interested in exploring with other parties about ways to coordinate, facilitate the approval processes of these new propellants. At this stage, we just wanted to inform you that we are interested in that and that we will approach parties in the margins on this topic. Thank you very much. But a big thanks for TIAP. We found that a very good part of the report.
Okay, thank you. Let's say when we started the agenda, it was the idea that all parties would know what kind of items would be on the agenda and that they also could prepare for that. So I also would like to give, let's say, other parties the possibility to react or put other issues on it. So this is something, let's say, also from a procedural matter, we would like to have had that item being put forward, and other parties already could be prepared for that. USA.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just a little confused as to where we are on the agenda at this point. Could you provide us a little bit of clarity? The last intervention seemed to pertain to a prior item on our agenda, and I don't recall it being raised upon adoption of the agenda. So could you just provide us clarity procedurally on what we're doing right now? Thank you.
Yeah. We are at 8F, and let's say what I just mentioned, there were no, let's say, when we adopted the agenda, so we are at 8F, any other issues. At the adoption of the agenda, we requested parties to say if they would have items on it, and there were no, at that moment there were no agenda items put forward for 8F. And that's something what I also mentioned to the EU, that it's a little bit strange to put it now here while it's not on, was not put forward on the agenda earlier. So from a procedure, but is this something you would like to add, USA?
Well, thank you, Chair. I think that clarifies it. That's why we were confused. So we'll take that last intervention by way of a public service announcement. Thank you.
I would like to close then now this agenda item 8F. I'd like to give it over to my co-chair.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Rolf. We will now move on to agenda item 9 of the agenda on stocks of methyl bromide. In 2022, in the 34th meeting of the parties, they adopted decision 34/10 on stocks and quarantine and pre-shipment uses of methyl bromide. Under paragraph 2 of the decision 34/10, Parties were invited to submit, on a voluntary basis, accessible data on the volumes of stocks of pre-phase-out methyl bromide at the country level to the Ozone Secretariat by the 1st of June 2023. Currently, submissions have been made by 3 parties: Australia, Canada, and the United States of America. Under paragraph 3 of decision 34/10, parties agreed to include the issue of methyl bromide stocks on the agenda of the current meeting. I would like to open the floor for a discussion. To have the points of view of parties as to how they wish to take the issue forward. Decision 34/10. And so the floor is now open for discussion on what could be the next steps. The floor is now open.
L'Union européenne, s'il vous plaît.
The European Union, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. I'll try to be very brief. It's the, I think, last point really on the agenda. We thank for the overview of the replies to this decision adopted last year. We understand indeed that 3 parties submitted the information, and we would like to thank those parties for having done that. At the same time, earlier today, we heard from the MB Talk that the estimates of quantities of stocks held, of methyl bromide held globally are becoming less and less certain, so that was certainly not a kind of message that we are any closer to bridging those figures. So it would not seem to us at this stage that we have made progress on the stocks issue. So we would kind of deplore that in a way, but we can perhaps just note that at present 2 parties have submitted, and if any other parties would still like to submit the information to the Ozone Secretariat to help this information gathering, I think that, I hope that should be fine still. So with that, thank you so much for the word, Mr. Co-Chair.
Merci.
Thank you very much to the distinguished delegate of the European Union. Are there any other parties who would wish to take the floor at this point in time? Ethiopia, have you requested the floor? Please go ahead.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Thank you also, European Union, for the proposal. We, the first day, were among the parties to request the floor to add the issue of methyl bromide, especially the stockpile. And I don't know how we missed. We didn't send the data and information we have to the Secretariat about the stockpile. So we wish to include Ethiopia to the list, and we will send our information and data to the Secretariat as proposed by the EU. Thank you, Co-Chair.
Merci à l'honorable.
I thank the distinguished delegate of Ethiopia. Are there any other requests for the floor? Please press the button if you'd like to take the floor. I recognize Cameroon. Please go ahead.
Co-chair. Recently, we had some issues of metabromide in Cameroon. The Minister of Agriculture actually did some importation around 2010 through one industry. They call them Crop Life. And when we had to intervene, it was like a problem between the Minister of Environment and the Minister of Agriculture. But unfortunately for them, the stock were obsolete, and we said they should be handled. And that because they were against the issue of ban of metabromide in the country, then we have to apply the polluter pay principle that who imported need to ensure that is sent back. Now, this discussion was taken to the Prime Ministry and had some serious debate. I'm talking about 10.2 metric tons of metabromide. And the stock is there, and asking the Ministry of Environment, because we did the ban, we need to look for, ask the Secretariat if it's possible, to see how far it can be eliminated. That's an issue, and we thought, I think this was really reported somehow, but I think I still have to go back and do the report to the Secretariat about this amount that is there. That's the issue we're having at hand. I think we thought it's necessary to bring the attention of the Secretariat once more. Thank you, Co-Chair.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you to the distinguished delegate of Cameroon. I don't see any further requests for the floor. And therefore, we have ended the discussion. And at the end of this discussion, we should continue our exchanges. As I said earlier, efforts still need to be made. That means that certain things must be done on this issue, and therefore I suggest that we keep this item under discussion, and perhaps an informal group could be set up so that there could perhaps be a formal group set up to take up the challenge concerning methyl bromide. Nowadays, quantities are not known. There is some uncertainty. Does that not mean that we should provide those details? I give the floor to the parties for you to react to this proposal. Thank you. Australia, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. I'm just a little bit confused about your suggestion on this. We heard the intervention from the European Union, which was quite clear, and also the information provided by Ethiopia and Cameroon. But I didn't hear any suggestions that we need to discuss this further at this meeting, either formally or informally. Clearly it's on the agenda and can be taken up again at the meeting of parties, but I'm just confused about the need to engage in formal or informal discussions at this meeting. So I'd appreciate it if you could help me with my confusion. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Merci.
Thank you, sir. And before I give you my reaction, I will give the floor to Canada. And then I will give you my response. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. And actually, the question that I had was the same as Australia. This delegation's interpretation of where the discussion went is that the topic was concluded here and there was no need for further discussions at this meeting. So we would welcome your clarification of your comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The European Union would like to take the floor again. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. In a way, I'm pleased by the discussion we had, because indeed what we had asked is if parties would still be in a position to submit data, that would be very convenient. And I think the more parties would do that, the more we have information to see how to take this forward. But to be correct, we did not ask at the moment to continue the discussion. We appreciate actually that several parties now already have indicated that they would come forward with more material, and I would like to encourage actually more parties to do that, but that's just our desire to have more information. And then if we receive that, we can see how to further engage. But to be transparent, we didn't ask to, let's say, continue the debate right now.
Merci.
Thank you very much, European Union. I believe the matter is quite clear, and that responds to the question from Australia. So parties would like us to request information from the parties. Ethiopia was also speaking in that line. So what we will state is that we are closing this agenda item and encourage parties to provide information relating to their stocks of methyl bromide to the Secretariat so that a database that is useful could be set up on this matter. And so this agenda item is closed. And if everybody is in agreement with that, then we will close the item. However, if there are any reactions, please do take the floor.
Bon, nous ne voyons.
I see none. We move on, therefore, to
Nous allons poursuivre.
we will continue with item 11, other matters. And we have not received any proposals for other matters from the parties. Are there any requests, proposals for discussion under other matters? The floor is open. Canada, you have the floor.
Bonjour, merci, monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair. I believe that the process and the rule of thumb is that when there are other matters, and if at the beginning there were no proposals for any other matters, then that item is not included, and so this agenda item is therefore unopened, and we move on to the next. However, perhaps I see other reactions.
Bon, nous ne voyons plus de partis qui souhaitent prendre la parole.
Since there are no further requests for the floor, we are moving towards the end of the plenary session. We will begin our work again tomorrow morning.
Je vois, il y a une partie qui voudrait.
There is one party that would like to intervene. Chile, did you want to take the floor? You have the floor.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair. If this is a statement to contradict my colleague from Canada, this is a point which is to recall states parties who are here in the plenary session. And with great thanks to the Secretariat, I'm not sure if many of you know, but a few years ago, the Secretariat of the Basel, Stockholm, and Rotterdam Conventions had a workshop. They held a workshop to prepare the co-facilitators, the co-chairs, the chairs, about the informal groups, the contact groups, the official sessions, such as the one that you are co-chairing at the moment. I would simply like to relate that in February last year, 2 of these workshops took place in Geneva, and they were sponsored by the Montreal Protocol Secretariat. And that was the second time that they had sent representatives to these workshops in order to train these facilitators so that they would be able to be trained and have the relevant information. I'm not sure if many of you are aware of this situation, of this possibility, and we would therefore like to make an appeal to all of you who support us in our work in these ways, and the Ozone Secretariat perhaps could contribute to this important work being developed in the margins of these conventions. I thank you so much, Mr. Co-Chair.
Je remercie l'honorable.
I thank the Honourable Delegate of Chile.
Là où nous sommes,
There, where we have reached now, we had stated that under 11, there were no proposals for other matters. Would you like us to leave other matters open? It's a question I'm putting to you.
Chile, Honorable Chile.
Chile, you have the floor. You have the floor, sir.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair. This was just a comment. We thought that it was useful to put it under this item of the agenda, but it's not necessary for this item to remain open. It was just a comment. Thank you so much for those clarifications. I will now ask the Secretariat if there are any announcements to be made under housekeeping. It seems there are none. The plenary session is now adjourned, and we look forward to seeing you again tomorrow morning. Have a good evening. And I wish you all success in your contact group meetings. Thank you so much.
Just to be clear, tomorrow morning is the, yes, because it's now on the screen as well, the terms of reference. So be aware of that tomorrow morning.